our question for today, would you trust a ladder? And believe it or not, that's actually quite an important question, not just in the philosophy of trust, but also in the way that we think about trust generally, in our everyday lives, our ordinary everyday goings on. And by the end of the video, I'm going to try and persuade you that that's true. Now, while you're waiting for that magical process to unfold and for the reveal to happen, please feel free to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Okay, so what gives? Why are we talking about ladders? Well, to try and make sense of all of this, we're going to have to step back a little bit and do the thing that philosophers often do, and we have a bit of a bad reputation for doing this, I concede, and that's ask, what do you mean by? In this particular case, of course, we're going to be talking about trust. So when we talk about trusting people, ladders, one another, what do we mean by trust? Now, I freely concede this sounds like a very silly question to be asking. But the reason for asking this silly sounding question is that, as a matter of fact, when we're thinking and talking about trust, there are actually two different senses of the word. And the two different senses of the word mean really rather different things. It's a bit like the case of bank. You're perfectly familiar with two different notions of bank. On the one hand, there's the bank as a financial institution, sort of thing that you might see on a high street. And on the other hand, there's riverbank. And obviously, bank in those two different senses of the word, completely different. Obviously, trying to open an account at one of those will be far easier than it will be at the other. Now, in trust, things are a little bit less clear than in that particular case. But nonetheless, when we dig into the examples, I think we can see pretty clearly that there's one sense of trust where we actually mean something a little bit weaker and a bit more like reliance. And then there's another sense of trust where we mean something a little bit richer, a little bit more moral. And we'll dig into the rich moraliness as we go through this video and try and tease apart these two different senses of the word trust. Okay, so bear with me while we try to explain all of this. Since I started off this video talking about ladders, let's use a case of a ladder as our stalking horse, our key example here. So let's suppose that we're talking about a case where we're trying to reach something down from the top shelf. We're straining every sinew to try and get up there. And someone comes into the room and says, are you sure everything's all right? Are you going to be okay? And you go, yep, I can trust the ladder to take my weight. Absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with speaking or thinking in that way at all. But pause there. What happens in the event that the ladder breaks? Apart from the obvious, I mean, if the ladder breaks, then you will fall to the floor and injure yourself. But importantly for us, how do we think about blame in this case? Specifically, do you think when you fall to the floor because the ladder has failed to take your weight, that you should be blaming the ladder? Should you be waving your fist in the air and saying, "Ladder, you have wronged me"? I'd suggest not, right? Obviously, that seems like slightly strange, possibly even slightly deranged behaviour. Granted, totally plausible to think that in the heat of the moment you might say and do all of that. But hopefully, when you've had the opportunity to calm down and reflect a little, you'll realise that actually you weren't really blaming the ladder. Rather, if there's any moral blame to go around, it's best directed at people. Perhaps the people who haven't cared for the ladder, perhaps the people who haven't put it up correctly, perhaps even the people who have tampered with it for the purposes of a silly YouTube video. And of course, that all seems perfectly right. There's no sense at all in morally blaming a ladder for collapsing. That just seems really, really silly. Okay, keep all of that in mind. Now let's change the case a little bit. Let's change it to one where you're doing one of those silly trust fall games. You know the kind of thing I mean. Often done at corporate retreats or these big trust building events. One person goes and stands in front of the other, and the one in front is supposed to trust the person behind them. They're supposed to fall backwards, have themselves caught as they go. And everyone goes, "Oh, wow, yeah, I trusted you, you caught me. Now we all do things better together." I'm never quite sure what we're supposed to get from the end of that, but it's supposed to indicate that there's some good trust involved. Now, in every instance of a legitimate trust fall game I've ever seen run, the person at the back caught them. But what would happen if they didn't? And again, I don't mean the obvious, well, the person in front would fall to the floor, Jonathan. I get that bit. The bit that we're interested in, though, is what happens when we think about the blame in this case. Okay, so the first person is there, they're ready to go, they lean backwards, they fall, the person at the back doesn't catch them, they crash to the floor. I don't know about you, I think that person is going to be furious. I think that that person who has fallen to the floor is entirely legitimately going to turn around and blame the person at the back for not catching them. Particularly, again, if the only reason they didn't catch them was in the interests of illustrating a silly point in a YouTube video. And in this case, it really looks like the blame is going to be warranted. At least, it looks like that person who fell certainly blames the person who didn't catch them, and it seems like they might have a little bit of a point, one that I'm sure I will be living through for some time. Probably should have caught her. Anyway, why is any of that supposed to be interesting when we're thinking about trust? Well, okay, remember I said at the start that there were two different senses of the word trust, a bit like there are these two different senses of the word bank. And now think about how that's played out in the two different cases we've been talking about. On the one hand, we had the case of the ladder. You climb the ladder, you fall off the ladder doesn't hold you weight, but you were trusting the ladder to hold you weight. And in the other case, there was the person who was supposed to catch you, they didn't catch you. And in the case of the ladder, we don't blame the ladder for letting us down, even though we were trusting the ladder. And in the second case, we do blame the person who doesn't catch us, and we were trusting them to do the catching. And this is why philosophers are quite attracted to the idea that there might be more than one sense of trust going around here. There's that one sense, the rich moral notion of trust, the one that we have in the trust fall case, where if you don't catch the person, you are the subject of justifiable blame. And then there's this other notion of trust where maybe we're just kind of relying on the world to behave in the way that we're expecting it to. We're relying on the ladder to take our weight. And to be sure, we use the word trust in both cases, but just like the way we use the word bank to mean both financial institution and thing at the side of the river, so we can use the word trust to mean moral thing or reliance. Okay, that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'm sure that I can trust you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. No, that joke is going absolutely nowhere. It is staying until we get an awful lot more subscribers than we in fact do. Until next time, stay suitably trusting in either a reliance or a rich moral sense, whichever works best for you.